Hello, warm greetings to you all. And I am Dr. P.D.Satya from International Institute of Anthropological Applications. And you are welcome to the virtual course on Dr.B.R.Ambedkar and the agenda for nation building. And today we have our speakers, Professor P.D.Satya Kumar sir from the Department of Anthropology, Andhra University, Andhra Pradesh. He is going to deliver the lecture on the topic Cultural Foundations of Structural Violence. So he is the expert on the Dr. B.R.Ambedkar's anthropological contributions, and he has published works, and he is the authority, international authority on this, Dr. B.R.Ambedkar's contributions to nation building, and also his anthropological contributions and expertise. So we are very glad to have him here as our course instructor, and the institute and the organization feels proud of him, and we look forward to listen to him and learn from him great things about Dr. B.R.Ambedkar's anthropological insights and understandings and applications to build the nations. So yeah, now I request Professor P.D.Satya Kumar sir to deliver his lecture.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. P.D.Satya, and dear participants. Very good evening. Apart from the honorifics that Dr. P.D.Satya bestowed upon me, I don't claim any authority. I'm a sincere student trying to share whatever I understood with all of us and us. So the last topic that we discussed is a facet of Dr. Ambedkar looking into the society from the perspective of cultural capital. So today we will take up the topic 5. The fifth topic is the cultural foundations of structural violence in Indian society. So I'm trying to pull up the ideas of Dr. Ambedkar with regard to the violence, the ongoing violence in Indian society, predominantly, in fact, not taking the shape of a structural violence. And I will try to pick up those ideas from Ambedkar, where he very vehemently exposed the cultural foundation. The very cultural foundations themselves have been organized into a kind of a not just a sporadic thing, but a kind of a inbuilt structural violence. So we will try to understand these things, because this is this has applicability, even the contemporary society as well, because caste violence, we are very aware they are a fact, and they do happen in regular intervals in any society. Even they do happen, and we witness them in the 21st century itself. So let us in fact know, it's as we can understand, to dig out the cultural foundations of violence as structured in the society itself. This particular survey takes a little longer, and then in fact it involves touching upon many facets actually, but I'll try to be as brief as in fact now as brevity allows me within the time that is allotted to me. So friends, if you look at the Indian society, even a casual kind of a study, we can find the assumptions, the structure and practices of this caste society reveal that it's a closed society, hierarchically organized and arranged in fact in a ladder like kind of a thing. And we will see the lowest rungs, we can call them as Dalits, in fact being excluded out of this total structure. So that is what we see, in a sense, this hierarchically organized social structure excludes the lowest, the groups in the lowest rungs from the very structure itself actually. So the first and prominent feature of this society is the codes of respectability and social visibility are arranged in a gradient order. See, that is exactly like in the sense what we see prominently is the code of say like in the sense social respectability, which Dr. Ambedkar called as the ascending order of respect and reverence and a descending order of hatred and contempt. This has been the operational and behavioral aspect of the caste relationships. So what he was terming it as, there is a society where social groups have been structured hierarchically in a ladder-like form, where the top leader, in fact, now gains, deserves, demands all kinds of respect and reverence, and that goes in a kind of a gradient form, like in the sense the lowest from the lowest to the next to the very next. So there is an ascending order of respect and reverence that we see, and at the same time when it the respect and reverence, in fact, no, it goes in proportion to the level of the person. The topmost gets the top respect and reverence, but in the reverse order what we see is not a kind of a reciprocation which we generally expect in a say in a kind of any kind of society, where we expect, in fact, no, a kind of a social endosmosis. If you if you receive respect, it is expected that we reciprocate it, but such reciprocation will not be there in the caste society. So those people who draw respect and reverence, in return they will express contempt and hatred. So that's the kind of a gradient ordering that we have it, and it is unnatural. And Dr. Ambedkar says and proves, to sustain that kind of a, codes of respectability and social visibility in an unequal order, he argues that violence is inbuilt into the social practice itself. So the violence is one mechanism through which these kind of operational lesson aspects are say regulated, and it doesn't happen like in a sense every day and all, but they act like a deterrent, and they express themselves on certain occasions. We are going to look into which occasions, in fact, now violence is visible actually. In other words, violence in the broad definition of not recognizing certain individuals and groups as basic human beings, that itself, in fact, now is a negating of their human identity. That is the crux of this Hindu caste society. Like in a sense, like debasing their human kind of a respectability and treating them as subhuman beings, that itself is the most virulent and violent form of say dealing with certain groups and individuals. So violence against Dalits is only a logical extension of these culturally integrated values of not treating certain human beings as part of society, or on part with on par with the rest of people. So therefore, the very non-recognition of certain sections of the society as subhuman beings, and not even say eligible to get the respect that is according to animals, uh, is violence. So this is we say that it is the starting point of, in fact, no kind of a inhuman kind of a violence actually. Our discussion today, friends, is to understand as to how violence in the brute forms is not a temporary social unrest. Many people, many, in fact, no, like say sociologists, anthropologists, they who were studying the violence in the society, eruptions of violence in the society, they have treated it, in fact, no, that this sort of violence, uh, it comes out on certain kind of occasions with certain factorial kind of an aspects. So they say they happen only when these factors, in fact, no, are in play. But our discussion is to understand this violence in a caste based society is not sporadic, but it's a phenomenon in the even in the contemporary rise, but it's very inherent in the way social structure itself is constituted. In other words, it is structural violence, often erupting into transacted episodes of open violence. So this sort of a kind of a violence, in fact, now see there are two types of violence in the caste society. One is like in a sense a tacit kind of violence. I will deal with that particular thing. And there was something otherwise which is open violence or naked violence. With regard to these two forms of violence, in fact, now the concoction is very concentrated, and that's the reason why Ambedkar commenting that there is also a devious yet virulent facet of violence in this structure, and Ambedkar observes such as such. Uh, I quote, Ambedkar says, in fact, on volume 3, the text is a philosophy of Hinduism. He says, I quote, the Nazis had indeed a great deal to learn from the Hindus. If they had adopted the technique of suppressing the masses devised by the Hindus, they would have been able to crush the Jews without open cruelty and would have also exhibited themselves as humane masters, unquote. So this is the kind of a intensity which Dr. Ambedkar has been saying. He was comparing, in fact, now this kind of violence in the caste society amounts to, in fact, to the scales of violence that the Nazi was, Germany has, demonstrated. But Dr. Ambedkar says that open violence, in fact, now if they had followed this example of Hindu caste society, they would have done, in fact, no, in a very silent, say, in a kind of a secretive way, and yet they can draw the credit of being a humane masters. So such is, in fact, now the kind of a violence that we see in both forms, in covert as well as the overt form, actually. So the subtle relation between the structure and the individual episodes was clearly recognized and pointed by another social scientist called Ellen Feldman, who was an authority on the racial violence. Actually, he expresses this in the following manner. I quote, the traditional polarization of the analysis of violence into structure versus event can be seen as two complementary blockades that inhibit human sciences from speaking into situations where the practices and the genealogies of violence self-organize into continuums of iterative meaning, where the very form of violence can capture the moment and patterns of its history itself. Both Feldman, in fact, now trying to explain that one event actually also, if properly analyzed, it shows the structural aspects of that particular violence. At the same time, it also demonstrates the patterns of violence that have been happening all through the history of the society. So he says that practices of violence both reflect and fashion social agency. See, Feldman's analysis of, say, structural violence in the society, he analyzes it in three ways: the event, the shadow, and the history, actually. So when people try to say explain, analyze, say certain events, they limit themselves only to the events. They do not encourage themselves to look into the pattern of those phenomena and its recurring, in fact, aspects of the phenomena. So therefore, Feldman says it is not just the event, but its shadow and also, in fact, its history are very important in properly understanding and analyzing this structural violence in the society. So friends, looking into several sociologists and anthropologists, both from the West and also, in fact, now from India, we will see that the social violence, actually violence in the society, is understood by different people from different points of say analysis, where we find, in fact, now certain Ruth Benedict way back in 1934, and Dubai, again, in fact, no, an American authority on racial violence, an anthropologist, Witting. All these three, say scholars, they try to analyze violence from the psychological, profiles. And Max Gluckman, Maliniski, Ratcliffe Brown, Victor Turner, they all try to look into the structural functional explanations of violence in the society. Whereas Bolton, Eisfeld, Connor, Wilson, and Lawrence, these scholars, they try to take the help of explaining violence through biology, study of in fact now sociobiology. And Napoleon Shannon, who studied the say Yanomamo, and James Ferguson, another cultural materialist called as Marvin Harris, then of course Ray Rappaport. All these people in fact no, they have been analyzing violence from the materialist perspective, while the Indian scholars like Veena Das and Ashish Nandi, these in fact now sociologists, they try to say project violence as a contrast between tradition and modernity. So this is how, like in a sense, Indian scholars have tried to do it. Besides, in fact, no, the Marxist scholars, for them, conflict is regarded as built into the system, social system itself, and it is seen as productive and positive. See, for the Marxist scholars, in fact, no, with their action as theorists, they see conflict as a productive and progressive, where they find that the oppressed groups, their consciousness in fact now and their resistance causes that kind of a say violence, as much as in fact no the expression of underlying contradictions which will culminate in the transformation of society itself. Given this divergent perspective, friends, it is not surprising that caste violence is treated as a consequence of one or a combination of many of these factors, which these scientists have been talking about. And many of the social scientists from the West, almost all of them, barring few like Gerald Berryman, Jan Bremen, and Zoan Mencher, these are the three scholars who are an exception to project the Indian caste society, like in a sense, as a society of conflict. All others, in fact, no, they try to project Indian caste society as harmonious, as complementary. But it was only Gerald Berryman, Jan Bremen, and Joan Mencher. They have brought up the perspective of, in fact, no, the contradiction, the competition, and then conflict. And Joan Mencher, in fact, also brought up that particular perspective of view from below, actually, how the lowest groups, suppressed and oppressed groups, look at the society itself, actually, from their own perspective. And certain Indian exceptions basically are Deepankar Gupta and also R.S. Khare. These two try to look in, into the caste violence in the caste society from a different perspective other than all this. So, my say explanation is that majority of Indian sociologists and anthropologists, and also a majority of the Western scientists, they try to look into Indian society basically as harmonious, as in fact no something which is highly productive, and people in fact now are very happy with this kind of a social order. But friends, Jairam and Satish Sabharwal, they critique these Indian social scientists and anthropologists that they chose to toe the same line of thought, even though they know that the truth is much different. These people are trying to expose the kind of a say the facade that Indian scientists are trying to discuss whenever they talk about the structural violence. They say that I quote Jairam and Satish Sabharwal write, saying that reluctant to acknowledge the existence of a range of conflicts for whatever reasons. Of course, we know what are the reasons. We may be tempted to bury them under such concept as quote unquote false consciousness of India's hollowed traditions of tolerance and community living. See, they were trying to bury the hatchet under the broad kind of, in fact, no, like broad kind of, say, fashioning India as a very, very tolerant, elastic, and in fact, no, encourages communal living. They were trying to, in fact, no, bury all these kind of conflicts, oppressions under the carpet. So that is what, say, Jairam and Sabharwal says, that these guys are reluctant to bring up the truth. And he says whatever reasons, and the reason basically is that a majority of the scholars basically are from the upper rungs of the society or the entrenched caste, and they are not ready to acknowledge the fact that there is structural violence with cultural foundations in Indian society. And Dr. Ambedkar, friends, coming up, here as a very, very, like accomplished social scientist, Dr. Ambedkar, while analyzing the cultural, he brought out the cultural background of this violence. He says that Ambedkar, in fact, now says that, I have quoted from different sources of his writings, the conflict of values and the silent struggle among the groups is cleverly interpreted as a normal strife occurring in any society, and not understanding the matrix of the skewed and unequal relationship is as the source of this strife. So Ambedkar says that many of the social scientists in India and abroad, they were in fact only referring to kind of a, like in the sense, a normal strife which occurs in any society, but they were very conveniently, in fact, no, say, putting aside the matrix of skewed and unequal relationship as the base of this particular strife. Ambedkar says a simplistic account of the commission of violence against a certain group would not throw any light as to how the phenomena is recurrent in nature. By naively taking that stand, it is not an integral part of the culture itself. So, say, Ambedkar says that these people have projected these things as a kind of a social aberrations or some sort of a deviant social phenomena, but they definitely, in fact, no, are not pointing to the central lesson of, say, structural build-up upon this particular violence. This discrepancy treating violence as not due to the way cultural factors are constituted, but isolated episodes and instances, have been sharply remarked again by Ambedkar and Feldman. Feldman says, I quote, event histories tend to write culture out of violence, for cultural values such as reason and morality are built into the very act of narration and linearity that reserves from the author and reader a semantic and moral hold on the violence denied to aggressors and victims who are seemingly blindly caught up in the fulcrum of morbid action. This is exactly Baba Sahib says. There is a tacit acquiescence of the structural violence in the society, which does not make the observers feel that there is something wrong with the society. There is a sort of a normancy with the violence, actually. Let's get into this fact. And Ambedkar, very, very, like in a sense, uniquely used a kind of a model to explain this particular society in the context of, in fact, no, analyzing violence. He said the Hindu caste society is a cybernetic system. So cybernetics, of course, we talk about these days as something, in fact, no, with regard to artificial intelligence, other things and all. But cybernetics has been there in the analysis of anthropology and also sociology for some time. Maybe, like in a sense, it can be traced back to some 7-8 decades actually. So the study of cybernetic model, if you look into, I'll break, there are people who use this cybernetic model actually. So this model operates as a kind of a self-regulating set of devices. The system, in fact, now has been unequal, and it has been it has a self-regulating set of devices gathering information of the statuses of its activities and using it as a feedback to maintain the system in a homeostatic position. This is what we call it as a cybernetic model actually. Suppose we can use the analogy rather crudely actually, the analogy of a thermostat. A thermostat, in fact, no, is kept there to maintain certain kind of say activity to happen only to some extent. When the activity goes beyond the accepted level, then in fact, no, it breaks the whole circuits to save the system as such. And also to bring an analogy, a much easier kind of analogy is like a geyser. We all see geyser. We put geysers in our bathrooms to get hot water. So the geysers have thermostat. This thermostat allows the system, the circuit, to take in fact, no electrical, kind of a say power to like generate heat, and that heat in fact no is allowed to certain extent. If it is not controlled, that heat in fact now will spoil the whole system actually. So therefore, when the heat crosses the allowed kind of the temperature crosses in fact to the allowed level, the circuit in fact no breaks. There is a circuit breaker. It breaks only to see the structure doesn't collapse. So therefore, the Hindu caste society has been fashioned by Dr. Ambedkar as a kind of a cybernetic system where it allows certain kinds of, in fact, no elbow room for for certain caste groups to operate with some sort of liberty, but it always has circuit breakers. It doesn't, in fact, no allow beyond a point. If lower groups, in fact, no who are to be maintained in the lower position, if they try to transgress that allowed position and all, then violence is fit into the very system as a kind of a circuit breaker. So we let us look into this actually. We know in anthropology, Gregory Bateson, way back in 1936, in fact, no, he was drawing on cybernetics actually, the theory of types, and the concept of schismogenesis in providing anthropological interpretations of the growth, if not origin, of conflicts. He was using that particular model that time. And another famous social scientist is Norbert Wiener. Many people know in way back in 1950, he used the systems perspective and cybernetics in studying the management of human labor. And in India, Rastogi, P.N. Rastogi in 1975, there are other example who used this model to explain factional conflicts and other political phenomena in the Indian context. But friends, Baba Sahib Ambedkar way back in 1930s, he was using this particular cybernetic model to explain violence in Hindu society, Hindu caste society. Ambedkar used the same model to explain the dynamics of Hindu society. He explained saying that the Brahminical group, as intelligence and information controlling agency, regulates the rest of the social activities so that the social order created by them does not go out of control. And it is always there as status quo. It is maintained despite the stress and strains that it is subjected to from both from inside and outside. So all these shakeups to pull down this unnatural kind of a caste and its oppressive kind of a social order has been maintained as status quo by these groups which are entrenched caste actually. The energy needed to run a cybernetic model is equated to, in Ambedkar's terms, to the productive contributions of the lowest groups. We say concerned Dalits, in fact, other groups, which have been kept in servile position through structural and other means so that they do not threaten the rest of the society nor tend to destroy it by trying to liberate themselves from their subordinate position. So violence, in fact, now friends, becomes integral and a crucial part of such a system where in Dalits have to be regulated and conditioned so that the value system they follow does not permit them to raise a voice of protection against the system itself. So in order to Dr. P.D.Satya, I request you to kindly ask our participants to name themselves and then kindly request them to be silent actually. Galaxy F12, please name yourself. Rename yourself, please. Yeah. So, therefore, what we understand is, in fact, no, violence becomes crucial to repeat in a system where, in a hierarchical system, where, in fact, no, like in a sense, there is ascending order of respect and reverence, and a descending order of hatred and contempt, actually. And so that this unnatural exploitative system, in fact, no, doesn't go to the level of being pulled down by the oppressed groups. So therefore, friends, bringing in Antonio Gramsci, again, the Italian Marxist, who talks about the ideology and then the social order in maintaining an oppressed position, he says that in the struggle between the haves and have-nots, the war of position, he uses a concept called as the war of position, is crucial in deciding the outcome of the issues in relevant is relevant in this context to explain the Hindu social order. This is more so in the case of Brahmin and entrenched castes, who are always highly conscious group in the whole social order, and who manage and manipulate the consciousness of other groups in order to sustain their own social standing as well as decision making on crucial aspects of the society. So yeah, that's quite say legible if we use this kind of understandings from these perspectives, how the violence in Indian society, basically caste society, is not a sporadic violence but a structural violence, basically. And we can also call it as a culture of violence. There is a culture of violence in this society. The peculiar and significant fact of the nature of violence committed against Dalits is that it is not due to any personal or immediately beneficial results. See, the perpetrators and those people who are in fact now oppressed, they may not know each other personally, basically, like in a sense. So there is not due to any personal or immediate beneficial results, but just because the other person belongs to a traditionally deprived group who is supposed to be of inferior status but trying to be in fact now assertive. That's the only point. So it is a kind of a impersonal violence, like in a sense the very mention of a group to a person belongs automatically generates some kind of hatred and contempt from those people who are in the upper ranks of the society. The very attitude and the perspective in fact now goes. So you may not know a person individually, but it is also called as impersonal violence unleashed due to the consent it gains from the hierarchical system, which sanctions violence as a means of curbing insubordination or any kind of protest. This is, friends, as we can see, it is in contrast to the other forms of violence in different societies: the racial violence, ethnic violence, religious or gender violence, where both parties, in fact, of violence, the inflictor as well as the inflicted, can be clearly identified as two opposing ones. But in case of the Hindu caste society, there is an overall tolerant acceptance of the Dalits are also, they also belong to Hindu society. But as of course Mahatma Gandhi argues, but any kind of questioning from the Dalits of their deprived and depraved position is met with violent reprisal in order to restore the kind of a social status quo. So this is not very clear. Like in a sense, one is that these are the people who are high and these are the people only low. This clear distinction is not that. We have a graded degradation. There is not simply gradation. These are the honorable groups. These are all inhonorable groups. No, it's not like that. There is a graded degradation, or there is inequality among unequals, where the kind of a perpetrator and the oppressed group differs from the context to context, actually. If a Brahmin is a case is between a Brahmin and in fact no a washerman, that is between these two. And if it is between a washerman and then a person who is from a say cobbler community, all it depends on the context, actually. So there is graded degradation of conflict over here, actually, friends. So therefore the loud protest from the well entrenched caste groups against conversion into other religions, maybe Islam, Christianity, Sikhism, like Buddhism, whatever, we see in fact no, there is always a protest from these entrenched castes against the conversion. It is due to the reason that conversion not only undermines their own superior position, because they say that we are no more in this system, actually, but also weans away the converted Dalit groups into other sections of the society. There need not be a clearer proof that the upper caste groups tacitly accept Dalits belong to the Hindu fold. That's one argument. But at the same time, they should not aspire the equal status. Actually, they try to see and maintain that particular thing. It's a kind of a paradox, actually, what is. And we know pretty well. I don't want to elaborate this particular question. There is always a scriptural evidence of component of violence. Of course, all of us are very familiar with the kind of approved violence, actually, or divinely sanctioned violence that we see from Lord Krishna in Gita, or whatever position. In fact, no, they say that violence basically is not your action, but it's your purported kind of, in fact, no, present violence. And scriptural sanctions, in fact, no, says that whenever the divinity instituted social order is threatened, yada yada pi dharmasya jatasya maranam dhruvam dharma samsthapanardhaya. The dharma basically in operational, it can be interpreted in many ways, but varnashrama dharma in the practical sense, in fact, no, whenever it is threatened, like in a sense, we'll see that there is a kind of a destruction of those enemies of say the social order as an incarnation. So that's why I would also bring in a very familiar kind of this thing in the history. Like in a sense, whenever a religious history is written, it is said that during the rule, the regime of that particular king, Dharma was walking on the 4 feet. See, Dharma was walking on the 4 feet, actually. So what is that particular Dharma? That Dharma, in fact, no, the king has maintained all the four Varnas to see. He has seen that all the four Varnas have been performing their own duties. So the analysis, if you see that, there is no problem for a Brahmin to follow a Brahmin Dharma as a Varnashram Dharma. There is no problem, in fact, no, for a Kshatriya to follow his Varnashram Dharma, basically, to rule. There also would not be a problem for a Vaishya to control his economy. Never, an issue of governance is required there. But there is always a problem to keep the Shudras in the servile position. For that, there requires a maintenance of the king, actually. So therefore, it requires a kind of a maintenance. That maintenance, in fact, now often erupts in a kind of a culturally approved or divinely sanctioned kind of a violence. And we also, if anybody looks into Manusmriti, which imposes harsh penalties on any group or individual who try to violate or disrupt the hierarchical order, the apex of which is controlled by the entrenched groups. If Manu was able to produce such legal codes against the healthy instincts of equality and fair play, it shows to what extent the system is already arranged and organized. Because Manu was only a codifier of law. That means the system has been running there like that for some time, preceding to Manu, and he was only codifying them. Manu was a legal encoder of social practices already existing at the time, and not the originator of all these things, actually. So we are pretty clear about that. Ironically, friends, the karma theory, which is supposed to be a brilliant conception of moral order, is turned on its head to inform the Dalit that his deprived condition is a matter of his own doing, and that the society does not owe any responsibility to uplift him. This is something like, in fact, no, say making the victim as the reason for his own victimhood. Actually, nobody takes an ownership for this kind of a structural, culturally approved violence. So it means that the control of information, in fact, is twofold. The positive one of denying all access to resources to all people, intellectual or otherwise, and the negative one of conditioning them that his position is not due to the collective conspiracy of the society against him, but a result of his own past sins. So therefore, it is explained like that, but in fact, it is a collective conspiracy that we see here in the which is in operation. It is only by this culture of subordination. See, the structural lesson of system, in fact, no, as we have been talking about, it imposes a cultural subordination of different caste groups to each other, and a maintenance of an ambience of terror through cultural values. This is what we see in the society. See, we see that there is a collective conspiracy. There is culture of subordination in analyzing this culture of violence, which Dr. Ambedkar has utilized. And he also referred to this ambience of terror wherever these subordinate groups try to, like, in a sense, reason out, and then try to attempt for a better position and all, humane position and all. He says that there is always an ambience of terror maintained in the society through cultural values, that the position of Dalits were held right in the place in order to extract labor and essential services from him, but at the same time erase his identity as a human being and treat them as subhuman beings. So yeah, this has been, in fact, no, the base of a culture that we see. Coming to the structural order, we see the relation between, in fact, no, each of the varnas and also the caste. I don't go, in fact, no. If you look into the episodes, in fact, no, with regard to other epics like the Shambhu Kavada, where, in fact, no, Lord Ram says that I am not responsible, but your own responsible. Like, in a sense, I have no personal animosity with you, Shambhuka, but because of your actions, according to the code of conduct, IPC section so and so, you have to be exterminated. So therefore, we see that. So we see such kind of aspects, like, but sometimes, in fact, no, we also see the entrenched groups like the Brahmin and Kshatriya. They are at loggerheads with each other, but at the same time, they are colluders and collaborators, in fact, no, to keep other social groups in subordinate and enslaved position by using violence and providing cultural and social justification for using that violence. So friends, uh, interestingly, both these groups belong to the unproductive, in fact, no, section of the society, and like producing the basic necessities of life, which can only be plundered by this cultural justification. So friends, going by this very kind of a logic and explanation given by Dr. Ambedkar, it is quite surprising that there is an ascending order of to power and prestige to the plunderers and exploiters of the system, while there is a descending order of disrespect and degradation to the toilers and producers of the society. That's why Baba Sahib says there is no dignity of labor in this exploitative system. To speak plainly, friends, it is only by using a set of cultural values and practices and attaching a power gradient to them can plunder the production of these groups can be sustained. So in the history, if you look at any kind of an attempt to bring in some sort of a recourse in the system, yes, there is naked violence against such contestations. The cultural history of India reveals that, among other things, friends, two powerful religious like social movements, of course, they are now into the religious realm, who questioned the basic assumptions of Hindu society and offered an alternative model with social democracy as the basis. We will see as the first ever social revolution in the history of the world by Lord Buddha, and later on in 12th century by the Basava movement, both aiming at creating a new social order, providing opportunities of growth and well-being to all sections of society, which eventually were destroyed by two-pronged strategy of assimilation of the best values in these movements and destroying violently the practitioners and adherents of the new model. We will see how the Buddhist monks have been, in fact, no, they were massacred, and they, in fact, no, Buddhism has been driven away from this society. In the same way, the adherents to the Bas movement also have been thoroughly exterminated. In fact, no, saying that they are doing injustice or they're doing things against the kind of a divine social order. So violence, basically, my dear friends, has been used to see that these new models of which are talking about equality of all human beings have been they have been met with kind of a structural violence. It is a clear evidence of how the society and the social order would not hesitate to use the violence to destroy any alternative model and sustain its status quo. I want to bring in a kind of a very what do you call usual kind of a thing that we see, friends. Whenever we observe this caste violence, even during the contemporary times, like, in a sense, if you go and ask the perpetrator, see, always, in fact, no, there are people who was, do such kind of murders, rapes, and other kinds of atrocities against the so-called lower groups, and lower groups are always, in fact, no, at the receiving end. after the episode, after the event, as a shadow. If you go, there are instances where social scientists have gone to these people and asked them, why have you done this dastardly act? Why have you used this naked violence against these people? The only answer, in fact, no friends, that comes from these perpetrators is that we want to teach them a lesson. That is the common answer that we get actually. So what is the lesson that they are teaching, and what is the lesson that the Dalit groups, as in fact now the receivers of violence, as the affected groups, that they want to, that they have to learn? The lesson is only one thing, that you never try to break this kind of a steel frame of caste order and then try to be free and equal in the society. So that particular thing, in fact, now we see. So therefore, Baba Sahib Ambedkar, Dr. Ambedkar uses two important expressions for this kind of violence. He says that there is cultural anesthesia and punitive violence in the Hindu social order. That's what Dr. Ambedkar says. There is cultural anesthesia where the observers basically, they never behave as though something bad is happening in the society, even though a naked violence is being taking place just before their eyes. Baba Sahib says there is a cultural anesthesia and punitive violence, approved, socially stamped, religiously sanctioned violence actually in the society. So that is what we need to understand. The severe form of this culturally sanctioned violence, right from the denial of identity to the contemporary unleashing of violence, is felt in the lives of the oppressed groups even today. Basically, it is a, but the killings and destroying of Dalit lives and property does not evoke any strong protest from the rest of the society, however intense it may be. Actually, it is almost taken as an everyday recurring phenomena. It's nothing surprising. When we open the newspapers, when you look into the news channels, all this is being treated as a masala. No one, in fact, no reacts to that as something inherently, in fact, no inhumanity is there in this society. Nobody, in fact, doesn't provoke any kind of humanly reaction. It is taken as a normally occurring phenomena. Even a communist like Jyoti Basu once replied to a journalist who inquired about the CPM alliance with Rashtriya Janata Dal at that time in Bihar, which failed to stop the Ranbir Sena. Now, probably many of us, we know about the Ranbir Sena of the Bhumihars, killings Dalits, in fact, now. Jyoti Basu said, when somebody raised, your party is also, in fact, in the alliance of those groups, the government is, in the government. He says, what is there? There's nothing surprise. Dalits die every day. This is what Jyoti Basu explained. And there is some side of, in fact, no, friends, there are two kinds of phenomena I want to bring to your notice whenever we talk about the contemporary caste violence. One is there is a kind of a escalation in the gradation or intensity of violence in the caste violence actually. One thing is, yeah, there are rapes and murders in the caste violence, and I'd like to point you that the rape by the perpetrators or murder by the perpetrators is one aspect of it. For a long time, we see those so-called higher groups, relatively higher to the so-called Dalit groups. In fact, no, they are the ones, the entrenched caste, the members of the entrenched caste, they are perpetrating rapes, murders, and atrocities on the victim groups actually. But if you look into the 21st century phenomena, the kind of a nature of violence, in fact, now has changed. It has turned into forcing on the siblings of the depressed groups to rape their own sisters and mothers. I'll bring to you the example of Khairlanji in Maharashtra, where the groups which are, in fact, no, like in a sense, perpetrating violence, they forced the younger brother to rape his own sister publicly. Like the siblings are made to, in fact, rape each other. Actually, they were forced as a kind of a punishment. I will also, my dear friends, with a lot of shame, that we have been living in such a kind of a society that another incident took place probably 7 years ago in a district called as Siwan, SIWA in Siwan, in Bihar, North Bihar. What has happened was, is a remote village in Siwan district. A Yadav boy, Yadav basically belongs to the Shudra group. Of course, Yadavs are ruling, but Varnashrama, this thing, they were Shudras. A Yadav boy, a student, fell in love with a Thakur girl, a Kshatriya girl actually. They know that such a love affair can never be, in fact, approved by the society. So they eloped. Afterwards, what happened? All the Kshatriya Mahasabha, they took out their swords and guns and went after this couple. To their misfortune, they were found after a week. And the Jat, like the Thakurs, they could catch hold of their own girl and they killed her immediately. They did not save her actually in their own words. They killed her immediately with their swords and guns, saying that they want to keep the honor of their own girl actually because it has been destroyed. They brought this boy, this Yadav boy. It has been published in Times of India, Telegraph, with all photographs, my dear friends. It is in the public sphere. So they brought the boy back into the village to which he belongs. And this guy, they performed a kind of Mahapanchayat. And this boy has a mother, and his father died, and he has a younger brother. So the crime against this person is, this boy, is that he flouted the Varnashrama Dharma. A Shudra boy eloped with a Kshatriya girl. So there has to be a punishment. So there is lots of adjudication. And finally, friends, the punishment awarded to this particular boy was to rape his own mother in the public gaze. I don't know, like in a sense, how many of us would would in fact know, like in a sense, take this kind of a punishment. If we were in such a position, I do not know, we would be so inhuman to adjudicate and award such kind of punishments. But it did happen, my dear friends. It came out in papers that sons were forced to rape their own mother because they have flouted this Varnashrama Dharma of the Hindu caste society. So I will also bring to you of another phenomena, is that there is a spectacle of violence, which also was parallel to the kind of a perpetration of violence done by Triple K, Ku Klux Klan of white supremacy movement in America, way back in fact now 1960s, where they were killing the protesting, demanding and protesting blacks for their say equal human position and all. They were killing them, shooting them, and hanging their dead bodies, corpses, for the public gaze on the trees, branches of the trees. We see, my dear friends, in the recent days, in different parts of the country, the Dalit girls are raped, murdered, and their dead bodies, in fact, now are put up as a spectacle, hanging from the trees. Actually, they were hung from the trees so that others see that this is their position and understand. So yeah, I can bring you, my dear friends, several examples. But the question is, the basic question, in fact, now I want to put here is, why is there is a rise of violence against Dalit groups? One, why the total system becomes silent, rather reluctant to raise its voice and protest against such violence? How can the large majority of the people just turn out to be mute spectators? Why their so-called quote-unquote humanity doesn't in fact make them to retaliate, make them to react to such kind of inhuman violence? Why is this collective silence in the whole of the society? If what we see is, in fact, when a caste violence takes place, when one particular group perpetrates violence, rapes, murders in the daylight, broad daylight against other groups, the rest of the society becomes a mute spectator. They don't intervene. Their humanness, so-called quote-unquote humanness, doesn't motivate them to, in fact, at least come to the rescue of the people who have been at the receiving end. Why? What's the reason? How do we explain the collective silence? Dr. Ambedkar interprets here. He says that there is a tacit agreement that if the rest of the groups are in the same position of opposition to the Dalit groups, in the event that happened, their behavior would also be not in any way different from the group that is inflicting violence right now, and that the lives of Dalits are of no value or significance whatsoever. The simple logic of this collective silence is, as interpreted by Dr. Ambedkar, that today they are doing it against the Dalits. If tomorrow I will be doing, I'll be doing the same thing. So therefore, I'm in no position to oppose that. So this is exactly, in fact, no, is the analysis of, in fact, no, the collective silence that as it has been an enigma in the society, in the caste society, as to why the rest of the society simply stands still and then act as though nothing has happened, as though nothing bothers them actually. So that is the tacit kind of an acquiescence and a tacit kind of an agreement of the war of positions basically. And friends, I'll come back to this aspect of, in fact, no, explaining such kind of violence in terms of modernity. Many of the social scientists, they try to explain this as a position of modernity actually. The gap between legal illegitimacy and the cultural legitimacy. What we see basically in this kind of a caste order, caste society is that there is legal illegitimacy for such kind of a violence. If you go by the democratic, in fact, no constitutional legality, it is termed as illegal. But if you understand in terms of culture, it is there is a legitimacy from the cultural perspective, and that is the kind of a paradox, the irony that we see in the kind of Indian society basically. So the facade of modernity that the educated section and the mass media project to the outside world and to certain sections within itself is only a thin veneer, which Ambedkar, in fact, no explained, and also, in fact, no gave a warning. He, of course, I can't quote Dr. Ambedkar because he was very, very attentive and then quite inquisitive in explaining the kind of a violence in the caste society. But for paucity of time and then also of, in fact, no explanation, I'm just keeping the very important aspects of Ambedkar's intervention. See, of course, we know during the third reading of the draft constitutional bill itself in the parliament, Dr. Ambedkar, in fact, now warns of one thing. He says, I quote, on 26th January 2050, we are going to enter into life of contradictions. Life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one person, one value, one person, one vote, and of equal value. But in our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social economic structure, of this unequal structure, we continue to deny the principle of one person, one value. He asks, how long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? If we continue to deny it for long, we will do so only by putting our political democracy in peril. We must remove this contradiction at the earliest possible moment, or else those who suffer from inequality will blow up the structure of political democracy, which this assembly has so laboriously built up. I end quote. Dr. Ambedkar, of course, anticipated that under the democratic constitution, all citizens will become conscious and will try to, in fact, negate all the kind of unequal, inhuman attitudes of the society and denial of social and economic democracy. And he anticipated that the people who are denied, the majority who are denied, they would, in fact, with all their consciousness, blow up their system. But nothing of that sort has happened for the last seven decades. And we also see that, in fact, that sort of a rise in the consciousness is obviously being blunted by the activities of the cultural acquiescence of this tacit violence. So to rephrase the same idea, my dear friends, so-called modernity in India failed to penetrate the basic levels of creating social democracy. But on the other hand, gave a new lease of life to this caste order by producing a social political segregation of groups like caste groups emerging as power blocks vying with one another to capture the resources. There is no need to dilate, of course, on this point, as well as several sociologists and anthropologists, in fact, now have pointed out the nexus between caste and power politics, that we are all aware. So the failure of modernity has another dimension, friends. It did not change the relationships among agrarian groups, the dominant, traditionally landholding caste being political leaders in the contemporary scenario, keeping the traditionally working classes in subordination by using the state machinery of oppression like police and other forces. We know pretty well the bureaucracy becomes hand in glove. The police also, in fact, now becomes hand in glove with the entrenched caste. There is sometimes this is elegantly interpreted as a traditional modernity, a conflict of traditional modernity, but this inbuilt flexibility, this some people say, whatever be the case and all, the Indian society has inbuilt flexibility to withstand any kind of changes, to take in any kinds of these things, but obscuring the fact that the rate of adoption is faster in the dominant groups than the subordinate ones, seeing that benefits do not reach the later. In other words, the traditionally oppressed and exploited groups still exist as the underdogs of the caste society despite claims of modernity. Friends, in addition, any kind of social and economic alternatives are denied to these groups so that they are structurally held together to provide the substratum. The proof of this argument lies in the fact that whenever there is some kind of a questioning and signs of revolt among the Dalits, all other caste groups combine and would not mind using overt naked violence to put them back in their old place. And I'll bring us another dimension to this. The role of judiciary in the whole kind of, in fact, no, in the so-called constitutionally democratic Indian society, where such deliberate, say, non-constitutionality and then, in fact, inhumanity has been perpetrating, we need not even balk at the role of judiciary in this matter. Judiciary is found wanting actually in this matter of keeping the law and order, and also, in fact, no, keeping us, the rights of all citizens of this particular country equally. We know, like in a sense, Justice V. Krishna here, Justice P.B. Sawant, and Justice K. Ramaswamy, all these people, they have been making a commentary on the negative role of judiciary in maintaining as the status quo of, in fact, no, Hindu caste social order. Justice Ramaswamy observes, 2003, I quote, he said, till Thomas case in 1976, the Supreme Court interpreted the Constitution to elongate social justice and economic empowerment and other human rights by the deprived social segments. But in the later judgments, starting from Indira Sahni case, that was in 1992, which was also called as Mandal Commission case. 1992, my dear friends, I would like to remind you that was the time when globalization has been, LPG has been accepted and then brought in by the government of India, where all those constitutional safeguards are there, in fact, no, for erasing, in fact, no, for the majority groups of this country. So starting from the Indira Sahni case, as Justice Ramaswamy says, deprivatory interpretations have become the order of the Supreme Court. The glorious contents of the social and economic justice and the process of judicial review which used to be used as a shield to the deprived groups, but unfortunately is being used as a sword against the deprived social segments, namely the Dalits, Adivasis, and the OBCs, unquote. That means he says that the interpretations of the Supreme Court, which are mandated to be, in fact, no, the right kind of interpretations of the constitutions for the protection of the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and OBCs, have been used by the respective judges as sword against these very groups. Actually, that was the kind of a comment that Krishna here, Justice P.B. Sawant, Justice K. Ramaswamy were talking about. Friends, from Karanchedu to Jaja, and from Kairlanji to Una or Hathras in the recent times, a close observation of the role as well as the failure of the police force come to the rescue of Dalit groups is clearly evidence of the oblique role that they play, they have been playing in siding with the infiltrators of violence. So the murders of Dalits in Jaja, in Haryana or other parts of the country, they have been defended by the Jat Mahapanchayat, Arya Samaj, Vishwa Hindu Parishad, Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sanghs, that these murderers are only performing their dharma and hence they are not guilty. See, these interpretations, in fact, they have been recorded. You can just verify them. Whenever a caste violence, in fact, takes place, perpetrators are, in fact, the entrenched caste, when they unleash naked violence on the oppressed groups like Dalits and Adivasis, these groups, these outfits, they were defending those atrocities as protection of dharma, and therefore the perpetrators, in fact, no, they are not guilty. They're there. And later, of course, my dear friends, coming to the last part of so my talk over here, Dr. Ambedkar even did not leave the dimension of silent terror in the caste violence. He was talking about silent terror. He says that even the educated section among the Dalits find themselves subjected to subtle forms of conditioning and cultural design which choke their consciousness and stultifies their personalities. At the same time, it can be observed that as to how several Dalit leaders, so-called leaders, in fact, now are working for the progress of and democracy of in this society, establishing this society, develop social pressure and become powerful articulators of Dalit concerns. But later on, they are accepted and assimilated by the oppressed groups and sometimes made to articulate and justify their interests and outlooks. We can see, I would quote, in fact, no, I have to take names. There was an article in 2014 in the Economic and Political Weekly. The title of the article is Three Rams Became Hanumans. The title of the article is, you can verify in EPW in 2014. The title is Three Rams Became Hanumans. The obvious reference, my dear friends, is to Ramano, like in a sense, Ramdas Atawale, Ramraj, and also he was later on, in fact, called himself as Udit Ras, and also to the third personality called as say Ram Vilas Paswan. All these three so-called celebrated champions of the say oppressed group of this society, champions of Dalits, in fact, all the three, they have been, in fact, joined the RSS Hindu, RSS BJP combined in their politics. So critiquing that particular position, the title was aptly put as the Three Rams Became Hanumans, actually. So this is how, like in a sense, a kind of an example as how these leaders, they have been accepted and assimilated by the oppressed groups, and they are made to articulate and justify the interests and outlook of the oppressors. So Ambedkar says it is by the strategy of assimilating and nullifying the Dalit groups, Dalit leadership, that the Hindu social order reveals its cybernetic nature, which we have been talking about. So therefore, friends, in other words, the normative and actual practices always work in tandem so as to sustain the supremacy of the oppressor. So finally, my dear friends, we have seen, in fact, now how Dr. Ambedkar used the analogy of a cybernetic system and the model to explain this particular systemic violence, which has cultural background, and he also explained the silent terror. He explained the cultural anesthesia and also the punitive violence. Ambedkar also explained the ambience of terror, and also, in fact, the culture of subordination and then violence. With all these kinds of concepts that he has brought in, Ambedkar brilliantly expounds that the Hindu caste society as a hierarchically organized system built on the ethic of violence, and it is against the principles of natural justice, healthy instincts of justice, equality, and fair play. So therefore, my dear friends, I end my talk by this very comment says that Dr. Ambedkar basically has expressed and expounded this kind of a cultural background of the structural violence in Indian society by using a model of cybernetics. I thank you very much for your patient listening, and I draw your attention if there are any comments, any kind of queries, any criticisms. In fact, now you're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor P.D.Satya Kumar, sir, for your very informative and highly expository presentation and of the present contemporary issues of cultural justifications of the violation and violence. So I now request the participants to, if you have any questions, you can pose your questions to the speaker.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Shankar, please go ahead.
Sir, more than questions, I would like to say a very important thing, which is like an individual experience, frankly speaking. When we speak about the Dalits, actually, especially in a culture of Brahmins, especially in the house, actually, the socialization has got its own phase of creating a hatred, actually, creating and justifying a hatred. It's a very, very important thing to be mentioned, because by the time of 10th class or by the time of 11th or 12th, you are constantly being pointed out the point that these people are in the majority and they are having their own reservations and they are just robbers of your privilege. Robbers of your own privilege. That is the way it is constantly being justified. And it is also being even more updated by giving private tutoring facilities to really get a better score in the medicine or the engineering, and constantly said that these people are going to get the post at any cost without studying also, but you are the person who's supposed to study within a margin. That's the way the poison is constantly created. You do not have any education about how they are struggling. You do not have any idea about how much they are really working for. But all their inspiration, everything is considered to be just a kind of a farce within a culture. And any kind of a question asked in terms of there is a difference between a human value and there is a difference between a humanity discussion between a parent and a child, actually. And whenever a child questions the idea of humanity beyond the idea of caste, there is always a public degradation, or there is always a kind of a a kind of a paranoid thing which happens when functions happen and the ceremonies happen. Constantly there is a degradation which is being practiced within the culture to handle it in a way that you have to supposed to live with, because the God is there to punish you. That's the way it goes in the culture, actually, which is very important. It's an autoethnography. An autoethnography has to be done about how a child really looks at the caste system and how a parent really looks at a caste system, and how there is hardly any discussion about humanity. There is just an idea of human values which is constantly being hammered on your head, but also justifying the idea of discrimination, degradation, constantly. Like what sir had told about the previous birth and all the idea, the same context is just being retained continuously, actually. And even lectures like this, no family participates. No family member participates in any enlightening lecture about Ambedkar or anything, actually. So it is highly difficult even to find out how the humanity can be found out. Only the violence can be justified. And along with the idea of cultural anesthesia, there is also a kind of an amnesia, apathetic amnesia, where people say, whatever has happened, forget it. Whatever has happened has happened. That person is destined to die today. That's why he died. Don't discuss about it. Don't spoil your head about talking about these people. It is always an everyday part of the game in life. This point is always being spoken. And it is interesting that when we are growing up as a child, we are told that those people have legs, hands, they are also working, you are also working. They also have nature calls, you also have nature calls in a degradable way. But by the time you reach 10th class, the idea goes like, these people are like this, those people, we are like this. It's very interesting how things are being encouraged in a very toxical levels, actually, to be really, really understood and to be agreed with, actually. So within the culture also, there is a very interesting thing. What Dr.B.R.Ambedkar, the legend, had meant was absolutely right. about how the culture could make it. And there is also an idea that where Dalits are not allowed, Dalits are not bringing up the other Dalits, but there is a constant check in the culture, in the official culture and many other places, that if these people are supporting the Dalits, then they are going to even protest against us. There is a kind of a check meter within the culture actually. Definitely there is actually, because when I spoke this point, my mom is a bank manager. When I spoke this point to my mom, she said that 20 marks if a Dalit gets, he'll get a job. 80, 90 marks if a Brahmin gets, he will not get even a single job. The reservation is just going to rob everything off. This is the way we are being socialized constantly, to hold a poison on these people, a hatred on these people. There is no education, there is no enlightenment, but there is constant way of hammering that these people are to be hated. There's a justification always. This is how culture socializes you. This is how culture socializes you constantly, and that's what we call it a shadow education today. The privilege between the haves and have-nots, to reach out to education like a privilege, and making education as a death sentence by the spending or the investment done on the child. So that's what parentocracy is all about. Parentocracy is the condition where the parent dominates over the talents and the skills of the child. He even diminishes the idea of efforts, because the child is not able to fulfill the wish of the parent according to the status quo, according to the cultural capital, according to the class which the community belongs to, everything. So the humanity of the child is to be dictated by his sticking conformities to the discrimination and to the degradations. In the name of the Lord, that's very important. In the name of the God, because there is a God to punish you if you don't stick in that. That is the culture. That is a very, very important culture. And there is also a very important idea, that the idea of putting up the thread. Okay, you are a beast while born, and you are a human being while grown. That is the reason you're putting the thread, the ekja to dvija. That is the idea which is being given to you constantly, which cannot be questioned. If you question, you are met with heavy, violent contempt, as you said. The hatred and the wrath, the silent treatment, everything is being practiced in the culture, definitely. What you have said is perfect, actually. In many ways, it is being practiced. But only thing, there is no proper autoethnographies to come out and say how the generation gap identifies the idea of caste discrimination and humanity within each other. There is a lot of difference. In fact, the guts to have intercaste marriage and not able to marry the same person itself has got a lot of important literature to be spoken, autoethnographic literature to be spoken about how things change in between each other. The idea of humanity, the idea of respecting the human beings, and the idea of degrading the human beings and disrespecting the human beings. There is absolutely a very, very lacunae in that part, actually, autoethnographic lacunae.
Can I respond, Dr. Rataya?
Yes, sir, please.
Thank you, Dr. Shankaran, for your very, very, in fact, no. Anyway, wonderful, in fact, no, like intervention. But I wish you were there in previous talks, because this being a course, actually, in the previous session, I have dealt at length with the topic called as cultural capital, how it operates in Indian society. So where I talked about the habitus and other things, and also in the second talk, I discussed the enculturation, caste and its effect of enculturation, actually, and how.
Yes, I had posed a question, sir.
Oh yeah, that
I had posed a question that time
yes,
about the healthy atmosphere between the father and the child. What is the healthy atmosphere to discuss about these things across the table? I had posed a question about that, sir.
So
last lecture.
Yes, thank you. As you rightly mentioned, enculturation basically, like in a sense, always defends this kind of illogical social ordering, both at the level of the people, in fact, who are perpetrating some this kind of inequality, and also at the level of the people who have been, in fact, at the receiving end. See, if you call that kind of ideology as Brahminism, Brahminism is not just among the Brahmins. That casteism and Brahminism, it is not just among the people who want to be in under superior kind of thing. The fact of the matter is that there is Brahminism and casteism even among the victims themselves.
Absolutely, yes, sir.
That's the fact of the life, actually. One. So that's the reason why, in fact, no, both the oppressed and the oppressors, they follow the same ideology. That's the kind of a what we call a paradox in this kind of a society, in this kind of an ideology. That's the reason why it entangles, in fact, no, the clear aspect of as to how far I to look at myself as a victim, as to how far, in fact, no, I should look at the oppressor. And there are many ways, in fact, no, they get ideologically intertwined. That is the reason why the war of position, as I talked about, Anthony Gramsci, there must be a war of position. I need to know who my enemies are, and I need to know who my friends are. That particular clarity is very tacitly, cunningly, in fact, no, not allowed to happen. See, that's why
Absolutely.
I
I agree.
said there are no platforms of dialogue for any two castes to come together and talk about the society. Never.
The, any two hierarchies also not to allow. That is also
That's the
important.
point.
No
That
two
is one.
hierarchies are allowed.
Yes,
Yes,
that is
sir.
one. Second thing is basically with regard to, like, in the sense your like, in a sense information or education that is being given. In my opinion, the kind of an education that we receive in the name of education, I would rather call it as organized ignorance of the society.
Absolutely.
It doesn't discuss the problems. Like, in a sense, even during our school days, we were talked about citizenry, citizenship, the duties of a citizen. And social sciences never talk about the problem of caste, issues of caste, and the aspects, and then the kind of inhumanity surrounded around these things, and how consciously, in fact, no, we should tackle this particular thing. So therefore, there is a kind of a what you call ignorance spiraled out in the name of education, so-called education. Point number three, I will get very brief, in fact, no, responding to you. Yes, on one side, the people who are beneficiaries of so-called reservation, because the word reservation is a misnomer. They are aptly called by Dr. Ambedkar and also by Jyotirao Phule, not as reservations, but as representations. They said, in a democratic society, all sections of people must be represented in all walks of life, in all areas of, in fact, life, based on the pro rata for their population, because democracy goes by, in fact, no percentage of this thing, representative kind of a proportion. So therefore, if scheduled castes are being, in fact, no, getting a representation of 15% in education and employment, that is not reservation at all. That is representation as per their population. Actually, it's a democracy, demo. And if scheduled tribes are getting 7%, that is based on their percentage of population. If OBCs are to get 52% as per their population, that is denied. That is not allowed, actually. But what we see is people who are from 3%, they are now, in fact, now are 15%, are championing about 50% of the opportunities, and they still cry over cry sour grapes on the representations. So the problem is the ignorance of the beneficiaries of the constitutional program. The very people, in fact, now who receive them, they also accept that there are reservations, special benefits, doles, the charity, or some sort of, in fact, no, like, in a sense, what do you call, mercy shown upon them, but not as a matter of democratic representations, as rights of representations, as rights of, in fact, no, bestowed upon by the democratic arrangement. That has been the basic fault. So the beneficiaries also don't understand that they are enjoying the rights of democracy, not as a compensation for the historical wrongs. Some people say that it is because that you guys are historically wronged, you have been oppressed, and this is what is giving to you as a matter of compensation. The fact is that, in fact, no matter how much you compensate, one cannot equate thousands of years of what do you call inhumanity, like poured upon them, heaped upon them. No one can, in fact, compensate. This is not compensation. Basically, constitutionally, it is very clear. It is said that it is not compensation. It is a new beginning of a democratic arrangement of things where sections of the society based on the pro rata of their population get represented. Of course, Ambedkar could manage only with education and health, but the original demand by Jyotirao Phule was that the representation should be maintained in the areas of education, employment, agriculture, industry, bureaucracy, and governance of this country. Ambedkar, of course, could bleat and manage only in two areas, basically. So therefore, as you said very clearly, there is a kind of a, what do you call, ignorance in the name of education. And as you said, in fact, no, enculturation, definitely it promotes that kind of ideological indoctrination. And the problem is, on the other hand, there is no democratic culture, democratic kind of, in fact, no, like argument. There is no argument or, in fact, no promotion of citizenry in this country. There is, I would rather say that there is no civil society in this country so far. We only have caste societies. We don't have civil societies, basically. Unless, until we create that civil society, probably, and this obvious, this kind of thing, it continues. We are very, very clear and conscious of that particular thing. No one, even the no Dalit should dream of, in fact, no, getting something that the constitution will work on its own. No, never. It has to be worked upon. The democracy has to be worked upon.
Road side made best.
Hello.
Sorry. I thank you for your intervention. I really, in fact, appreciate that. Thank you.
Sir, but one thing which I want to also last mention is about cultural trauma, deliberate cultural trauma constantly being imposed as a way of coming out of that mode of progressive thinking.
That's
come out of the mode of progressive thinking, there is a justification of a cultural trauma. Constantly you're being degraded, you're constantly facing the hatred and everything. So such that they can break your will of not thinking progressively. So, and they don't take responsibility for your trauma. The very interesting they don't want to take responsibility for your trauma. They just
That's
want
why, yeah, I'm sorry to intervene. That is the reason why Ambedkar used this kind of a phraseology called as legal illegitimacy and then cultural legitimacy of this kind of a social order and then this kind of behavior. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. Dr. Rataya.
Dear Srinivas Bandari sir, please unmute your mic and you can pose your question to the speaker.
For dignity to all. Satpal sir, I have two questions. Sir, Baba Sahib has actually shown us the path, right? You know what exactly we have to do, but why are we now not following the path what has been showed by Baba Sahib? Like, why exactly our Bahudins do not have enough wisdom to follow what Baba Sahib has said or what he asks us to follow? When, with respect to the religion, what I'm specifically talking about. The other question is, though as per the constitution, we have the right to follow whichever religion we want. So what I think is the Hinduism, Islam, and Christianity. Like, has Baba Sahib, what were the thoughts of Baba Sahib on Islam and Christianity? Because I often hear or read that Baba Sahib has said a lot how the Hinduism has oppressed the Bahujans or specifically. So I would like to know some more how these Bahujans are treated in Islam and Christianity, because what I feel is all these three religions in India are Manuized, they are Brahminized, and they oppress the Bahujans a lot. Thank you, sir.
Can I go, Dr. Rataya?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please.
Yes, Srinivasji, wonderful, kind of intervention. I appreciate that. Why we are not following Dr. Ambedkar and his suggested means of liberating the Bahujans. The point which Dr. Ambedkar very clearly talked about is the problem is not just economic, not just in fact political. It is systemic. He talked about that the problem is in fact the backwardness is systemic. So therefore, it is more to do with social and cultural life of the people. So he has very clearly mentioned that the liberation, in fact, is possible only when people can come out of this Brahminical cultural way of life. So, for which Dr. Ambedkar himself said, the laws, basically, like in a sense, he says that the laws are on the side of justice, or the ideology that is enshrined in the preamble of the Constitution. It promises a life of liberty, equality, fraternity. But the culture that the people, or including the Bahujans, in which they are seeped in from day in and day out, that particular culture, it denies all these kind of benefits of the Constitution, all the attempts, in fact, not to democratize the life of the people. So therefore, these people, like in a sense, very few people are conscious, and those who are conscious are also not in a position to, in fact, wriggle out or liberate themselves from this kind of a social cultural life. So therefore, unless this culture, in fact, is completely erased and debased and de-Brahminized, and a new cultural life, in fact, based on democracy and the values of liberty, equality, fraternity are adopted, there can never be, in fact, a kind of a liberation. So therefore, the victims should get that kind of a consciousness that the liberation is on one side, on one part, is within their own hands, that they need to come out of this particular thing. And the other side, of course, there is a reaction, always would be a reaction. Sometimes, as we discussed today, there would be a kind of a violent reprisal of any kind of a attempt to come out, but they should brace themselves up to that particular risk. Otherwise, nobody, in fact, doles your freedom on a platter. You will have to take it. You will have to fight and then take the kind of freedom. Freedom is fought and won, never, in fact, like in a sense, given, offered as a dole. So that is one aspect of it. Second, in fact, the point which you are talking about is, yes, even though these people, in fact, many of the Bahujans, they converted to religions which obviously, in fact, talk about a kind of a doctrinal equality or notional equality. But when they come to the Indian scene, as you rightly said, they have been inflicted with the virus of caste. The Indian Muslims, the Indian Christians, the Sikhs, and also Buddhists in this country, including the Jains, we very well have seen that caste is the operating principle even among the converts, and the caste definitely doesn't allow kind of a comradeship among all the followers of that particular faith. So they interact within their own caste system, they marry in their own caste, they bury their dead in their own caste based graveyards, and they worship in their own caste based gurudwaras, caste based churches, caste based mosques. So therefore, as long as caste becomes, in fact, a kind of an operating principle even among the religiously converted Bahujans, this menace, this virus, in fact, would obviously oppress them. So therefore, it is required that even after the so-called conversion, the culture of, in fact, like in a liberation, the culture of equality, the culture of democracy should be accepted as a way of life. So until then, in fact, just conversion doesn't liberate people. I think so. We have discussed this particular aspect of caste among non-Hindus when we talked about society in India, actually, at length. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Satpal sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Srinivasji. Yeah.
Dear participants, any other questions? Collective silence against the atrocities done against the lower caste groups. That is very dangerous to the society. at large. When,
Satpal sir, one more question I have. Like for as you said, like there are 3% of population, and but they are getting a reservation of 10%. Like, can't we file a case on them and get it cancelled? Because what happens is, as you are well aware, even after a reservation, whatever percentage of reserved seats are not filled up, they will be again moved into a general category, and those will be filled up with the the general category. So first of all, the reservation, which is the present reservation which we have, the seats itself are not fulfilled, and again on that they are getting 10% extra. So in all the major fields, even they will be taking over. So our guys are not aware of this strategy which they are playing, and our guys think that we are not capable enough or not competent enough, and we're lacking behind. The ignorance what our educated class are doing, it is really harming our society, mainly the Bahujan community.
Yeah, you're right, Srinivas ji. Actually, like in a sense, we discussed with regard to, of course, we have got democratic governance, but who are at the helm of affairs? It is again, in fact, the entrenched caste of the Brahminical society. They still, in fact, have become the controllers of democracy in this country, and they themselves know pretty well if democracy is implemented, that would become suicide for them. So they don't commit suicide, and that's the reason why we are talking about the role of bureaucracy, the role of police, and also the role of judiciary in behaving anti-constitutional, delivering the judgments anti-constitutional. Actually, like in the sense, I used to talk about the undemocratic attitude, unconstitutional attitude of the judiciary. Basically, I gave lectures with the title Brahminism in Higher Judiciary in this country, and I have a charge sheet against the Indian judiciary, especially the Supreme Court, as to how many cases, in fact, they have given anti-constitutional judgments actually. But the point is, judiciary, after all, is a creature of the Constitution, and every creature of the Constitution, every section of the Constitution, every component of the Constitution, they are answerable to the people of this country, because it is the people who gave the Constitution to themselves and power to see these institutions, in fact, control, and also, in fact, protect the constitutional guidelines. But unfortunately, my friends, these people who, in the name of protecting the Constitution, they themselves, in fact, acting unconstitutionally. So therefore, unless the people make the judiciary accountable, make the bureaucracy accountable to them, they act in their own way. That means Dr. Ambedkar said, without social movement, your rights, in fact, can never be fulfilled. He says that the laws cannot guarantee you the rights. Your laws cannot guarantee you the rights. He said it is the social and moral conscience of the society that guarantees all the rights. So that's the reason why, like in a sense, as long as the society, especially the Bahujans, do not have the consciousness and understanding of what is a democracy and how to run a democracy, they can never, in fact, like in a sense, dream of the judiciary, which is thoroughly Brahminical. They can never dream of bureaucracy, and also, in fact, other institutions of democracy which are being controlled by the Brahminical sections, that they will dole out anything to them. So therefore, when you said, why can't we file up a case? I tell you, Srinivas ji, there are n number of cases. Just for example, in fact, there is right to religion, religious freedom. When the scheduled castes, in fact, they convert into other religions and exercise the right to freedom, which has been a fundamental right, their social position, in fact, is being altered, which is unconstitutional. There are, I know, many cases filed and pending in the Supreme Courts, which they are kept in reserve. They never give the verdict. So there is a deliberate daylight, what do you call, in fact, it's like subversion of the Constitution by those very institutions of the Constitution. And unless there is, in fact, the kind of a social consciousness the benefits of democracy cannot be accrued to the most needy in this current society. So that is the reason, that is the necessity of the social movements at at present. Those so-called educated basically actually, like in a sense, sometimes in fact no, it so is happening, unfortunate to say comment this, the role of the educated is causing misery to the masses of this country. The educated in fact now being selfish and they're bereft of their social responsibility, and they have been leaving the teeming millions of the people, citizens of this country, to the perpetrators of violence, perpetrators of injustice, and then undoing of the constitution. So therefore, educated people, like in the sense, unless they become responsible, unless they are made to become socially responsible, there is no way that we can expect. So therefore, that is the reason, the necessity of social movements in this country. Thank you.
In fact, in the 1952 presidential order, it prevents the scheduled caste communities from enjoying the reservation when they choose the freedom of religion to turn to Christianity. They lose their reservation. When scheduled caste communities they turn to Sikhism or Buddhism, the reservation is not revoked. They are allowed to have a reservation, but when they intentionally voluntarily choose Christianity as the by utilizing the right to freedom of religion, then the reservation is removed. And there are cases pending in the Supreme Court against this injustice done to scheduled caste communities in India against their freedom to religion.
Yeah, thank you. Can I comment here, Sir Dr. P.D.Satya?
Yes, sir, please.
It's a valid kind of observation, but the fact is, in fact, no, we need to look at the other aspects as well. When you made this comment that a conversion into Sikhism and the Buddhism is not, problematic in extending the reservation, so-called representations, we need to look into the kind of efforts made by these two sections. It is not just Christians. Any scheduled caste, the presidential order says the presidential order itself is anti-constitutional, anti-people, but it came out in 1952 saying that any scheduled caste who converts from Hinduism to any other caste, other religions, they are deprived of any kind of these benefits. But the point is, the Sikh adherents in Punjab actually, they did not take it low. They fought against the government of India. The Sikhs, basically the scheduled caste, they constitute nearly 30% of the Punjab, and they fought actually for a vehement period of time, where the president order has to in fact exempt Sikhism.
Oh, I see.
The Sikhs also, they fought actually, won. And I want to bring to your notice, when Dr. Ambedkar converted lakhs of people into Buddhism in 1956, almost 8 lakhs he has converted in 2 spells. Can you unmute those people, sir, please?
Yes, sir, yes.
So 5 lakh people at Nagpur, and after a few days another 3 lakhs at Chandrapur. When these many people have converted into Buddhism, which of course they don't call it as conversion, they call it as in fact Moolantar, going back to the roots. I must tell you, over 2 generations of Buddhists who converted listening to Dr. Ambedkar, they have to forego reservation.
Oh.
Like from 1956 to 1992, only under when VP Singh in fact exempted in fact Buddhism, Buddhist converts to be in fact not allowed from that particular presidential order. Till such time, till 1992, Buddhist converts do not have reservation.
Wow. Oh.
They fought very consciously. They fought in fact very democratically, of course, and finally they could get this particular kind of constitutional right to freedom. But unfortunately, the Christians never fought. They never bothered that this is an issue to be fought. Actually, it took place. In fact, no, the personal assistant of Nehru, who is a Malayali Christian, a Syrian Christian, a Brahmin convert. In fact, no, his name is John Matthias. When this issue was discussed in the parliament, whether the Christian converts from scheduled caste do they require reservation? John Matthias, who is a Brahmin convert, he commented that recorded in the parliament saying that we don't need any reservations. We just require Christ. He will take care of us. That was his comment. So there was no attempt, or there was no, in fact, no, like, there was rather stalling of this particular thing actually. So Christians became a little conscious only, in fact, in 1990s, after 1990s. Before that, no Christian organizations have come forward this particular thing, other than only few individual litigations in the Supreme Court. Not many Christian organizations, in fact, never took this seriously. They were always, to a large extent, they were otherworldly. And later on, of course, from since 1990s, we see some sort of a social awareness among them, and then they have been demanding that. But the point is, judiciary would not allow. So therefore, whichever sections, whether they are, in fact, like even Muslims are denied that. The Muslims, in fact, the scheduled caste Muslims are denied. They are only kept as a group of BCE into backward classes. Actually, the scheduled caste Muslims, those castes are not getting reservation, actually, so-called representation. So therefore, this is against the constitution. We know pretty well, against the fundamental right. But the problem is, these people, they are not conscious enough to raise these issues to that level. Even though they are conscious enough, their conscious is not equal to the task. The Brahminism of the judiciary, in a sense, they are shooting from the shoulders of the judiciary. They say that they take the case, they try to adjudicate for some time, and then keep it as a reserve. So if judgment is reserved, there is no time limit for that. For decades, it can be under reserve, actually. So unless there is social pressure, social movement, the constitutional rights, in fact, would never be like, in a sense, realized. Yeah. Thank you.
The judiciary in India, they did an excellent job in some sectors, some areas, but why intentionally for decades these cases are pending against the religious freedom of scheduled caste communities, particularly to Christianity, is really unfair. And also, it is interesting to note that when tribals are turned to Christianity or other religions, their reservation is not taken away from them. But whereas scheduled caste communities, they turn to Christianity, only their reservation is taken. That is really unfair. And why judiciary is keeping silent on this particular issue is really, really questionable.
Yeah, the role of judiciary is highly questionable in India, and judiciary basically, like, in a sense, nowhere in the world has the kind of a audacity to appoint their own judges. Those appointments, in fact, nowhere, in fact, judges appoint themselves except in India, because they have subverted the provisions of the Supreme Court, actually, so the Constitution. One. Second thing is, even though in a corporate country like America, there is annual review of judgments by respect to judges, and these annual reviews are very essential for the elevation. But there is no such kind of arrangement in India. Nobody adjudicates the judges. They can be rogue. They can, in fact, not give any kind of a judgment. So that is one drawback in this country. And third is the legal, experts, they say in India, whatever good judgments came up, the good judgments came up only in the cases of the privileged. I think so. You got my catch. Good judgments were delivered only when the privileged sections are involved. Question of human rights comes up when Kesavananda Bharati case comes up. Kesavananda Bharati is in fact a Hindu religious trust. When the religious trust rights are curbed, then the question of human rights comes in, fundamental rights come in. So therefore, the right kind of judgments came in wrong cases, and they are not applied to all actually. And there are many researches on the role of judiciary in this country, and judiciary is found wanting in its performance of delivering, in fact, judicious judgments attuned to the Constitution, the spirit of the Constitution. One. Second, basically, like in a sense, with regard to the tribes you're talking about, yes. See, it is the question of, in fact, the population. The tribes themselves are minuscule minority in this country, 8.8%, and that too, the Christian conversion into the tribes basically is not problematic, for the Brahminical sections. It is only when 15% of the population, like scheduled caste, that is definitely an issue of numbers for them. So that's why they are very, very conscious about this particular thing. Actually, I think so. Like we can discuss certain of these things. There is another topic which I've kept is Ambedkar and his anthropocentric religion. Probably, I think so. These issues can be started in that particular area. Okay, yeah.
It is really painful why social sciences are not able to present the issues which are painful to the large sections of the society in India, and why they're keeping silent, particularly the caste-centric the problems caused to larger sections of the society. Why the social sciences, when they study society, the relations, and they do evaluations and they explain the processes for different sorts. So that is really questionable. Would you please expound on that?
Yeah, during my talk today, I talked about, in fact, how violence has been analyzed by the sociologists and anthropologists in India, and I also brought out the quotation by Rajaram and Satish Sabharwal. They say that Indian social scientists have been dishonest in properly, in fact, analyzing violence and also the social situation in India, for the reasons they said too well known. That means most of them are from the entrenched caste, and they never want to commit suicide. They are not giving honest and objective interpretations of society in this country. They also are indulging in internal colonization to keep the entrenched caste, in fact, in the pedestal at the cost of the vast majority of these deprived sections in this country. So therefore, social scientists, like in a sense, like that's the point which I'm trying to make. It is they themselves are not honest in their studies. So it is again, in fact, for us who are Democrats to make them honest. That's it. Why they are dishonest is because they have vested interests. That's the only point. Dr. Ambedkar in volume 5, he discussed at length in full chapter, saying that education and democracy. He said democracy, many people say that education gives the kind of rationality and also gives the consciousness to become people to become democratic and then turn the society to democracy. Dr. Ambedkar did not accept to this particular proposition. He said education itself, in fact, is not enough. He said education is a double-edged sword. He countered, saying that if education only gives the kind of a privilege for working for betterment of the society, the Brahmins have reserved education for 3,000 years. What they have become? Have they become Democrats, or have they become vested interests of the society? So therefore, education itself is not. Education, along with vested interests, that's what the Brahminical sections have this in the country, they turn the society into unequal. So therefore, education should also accompany with the consciousness of democracy. Then only it leads to a kind of better society. That's the point. In this country society, in fact, now many of the anthropologists, sociologists, and many of the social scientists, they in fact now entertain their vested interest along with their education, and that's the reason why not a single theory has been brought out from Indian social scientists. We could bring out only concepts, not theories.
That is very sad. That is very sad, unfortunately. It is not that India lacks the intellectuals or the Indian intelligentsia really making many advances in technology and science and in social sciences. Why theorizations that promote the collective well-being and common good and promote the democracy in the pluralistic society like us. And that is really, yeah, we respect civil society, we respect the judiciary, we respect democracy, we respect Constitution of India, and we are waiting for the leadership of the judiciary to serve, to offer equal justice to all sections of the society, and also their due attention, so that and also. As Professor P.D.Satya Kumar sir rightly said, unless there is the personal responsibility of each citizen and raising their awareness levels of the exploitation, cultural foundations of the systemic exploitations and violence that is ongoing, instead of turning blind eye to this justified exploitation and violence, and this education should focus the structural reasons for the ongoing justified the exploitation and violence against the people, and robbing the humanity and abusing humanity. So treating humans not fairly. So hence, education, unless provides leadership for reflective thinking and creative thinking and critical thinking, particularly to address the issues, not only caste-based issues, but also many other structural violences that are ongoing, and also provide the reasons and also provide the preventive measures for all these things, then there is no hope. Unless there is the governments, they are punishing people who violate the laws. There's IPC sections are there, but what are the measures that the government takes, or governments of different states that take? What are the policies that are in place to prevent those repeated recurring violence and the exploitations that are taking place against people, larger sections of the people? That's where nation building process, Dr.B.R.Ambedkar's insights and understandings of our Indian society, why this virtual course is taken up as a most important course at this point of history in India. Ambedkar has to say and contribute a lot for building the nation. Ours is a pluralistic society. Ours is the biggest democracy in the world, which needs anthropological insights and applications and understandings. So Ambedkar is a trained anthropologist who understand the structural reasons of the violence and the inequality, and he not only offered solutions to prevent the crimes done against the humanity, and also he provided the strategies also. So we are really deeply indebted to Professor Satyapal sir for his valuable and highly informative lectures. that illuminate us about what is going on in India, and why there is a collective silence against the crimes done against the larger sections of the society. And we, a small group coming together, reflecting on this important information. And we, at the end of this course, we need to come up with some developing the applications to preventive applications and provide the sustainable solutions, and also to provide insights for to assist the judiciary, to assist the executive, to assist the legislature, to come up with the healthy policies and beautiful and nice to promote the collective well-being and common good, and also peaceful social coexistence, and also to provide the leadership for the nation. So with this the broader vision, this course is initiated by this International Institute of Anthropological Applications. We are here reflecting on the important understandings of Dr. B.R.Ambedkar, the father of Indian Constitution. And not only reflection, we are here to come up with the collective action and to develop applications to show the way forward to address these social issues, so that we will collectively partake in the nation building process in our country. Yeah, participants, before we close this session, is there any person to make comments or ask questions? Otherwise, I'm going to end this session. Yes, Shankaran?
Yes, Sab. Sir, I would like to mention just one point, that when we speak about this idea of violence and perpetration, we have to agree with the point that the idea of insulting and degradation within a culture is also kind of a demotivation to not take up this part of as part of cultivating in humanity. Actually, there is mostly in culture, there's mostly beliefs rather than a proper space for a human practice, actually, which we have to agree with that, actually, or a way to perpetrate stigma from generations to generations, to keep up the stigma from generations to generations.
Yeah, in my MA the first semester, I think, Professor Raghav sir, he was the head of the department in the Department of Anthropology, University of Hyderabad. He was teaching on caste. Then I said, sir, we should annihilate this caste in India. Then he laughed with loud voice and said, Rataya, it will take another 200 years to annihilate caste in India. Why, sir? I said. He was laughing and laughing. I was a young student in my MA. So the thing is, it is not that people are not aware of the issues related to caste in India. All the educated communities and even illiterates also, they're aware of the exploitation, the caste-centric exploitation and violence, structural violence. People, they suffer, they know. So the thing is, people over the centuries developed the pessimistic attitude towards these issues related to caste. It is not possible, it is impossible phenomena, it is a time-wasting thing to fight against caste, it is impossible. That kind of pessimistic attitude I come across. So it is a worldview matter, it's a mindset matter, it's an attitude, positive attitude education is needed. And also I encourage our learned friends to think about this, and there are many sessions, another few sessions to go. This course will continue up to November. Every alternative Wednesday, Professor Satyapal sir is available to deliver these lectures. So we have already scheduled listed as topics in our course outline. So we are also going to introduce this course in the different universities, particularly in anthropology departments. because the anthropology is the discipline which does ethnographic contribution. So yeah, many things we are trying to do, and it is we want to promote the discussion, we want to promote deliberation, we want to promote deliberate actions to tackle this tough issue. It is not an impossible problem, it is a difficult problem. So, but we need all minds synergy to come together to do our part, and to come up with solutions, develop applications in the digital spaces, in this digital world. Nothing is impossible. And if we can really put our energy and thinking and come up with the moral and social consciousness and responsibility, I think it is 100% possible to overcome and to overthrow the issues and the damage done by the caste system to humanity. Humans are degraded unfairly, and we want humanity back in place, not only in India, in elsewhere in the world. We respect humanity, we respect our positive self-image, and we want to promote positive self-image of every individual so that they will have a personal responsibility, and, which will give a spark, inner fire to come up with courageous thinking and creative action, come up with strategic options. So yeah, I thank you very much, and I'm going to close this session because participants, yeah, this is a serious issue, and we are thinking. And thank you for participating. Thank you for your valuable time. It is encouraging us, your participation and your reflection. And let us come together to do something to save India from these anti-social systems that is robbing the humanity from humans, freedom from humans. Let us restore the dignity.
Satpal sir, as you're saying, like even we can't expect any justice from the judiciary, right? As you're saying, the in the top places, all the Brahmanized or the Brahmins are sitting in, so we can't expect any landmark judgments, as you mentioned. So we can't expect any justice from the judiciary as well.
You can expect only when you can tackle the judiciary, make it accountable to the people.
How can we make it?
You have to, in fact, now make a movement, social movement. You take democracy into your hands. Unite, and then become strong, and see the democracy is worked upon. That's the only way. Yeah.
Satpal sir, I'm Shankaran speaking. Hello.
Sir, I have to leave for another meeting actually.
Okay.
I would love to, in fact, now join you.
I will talk to
8:30 I have to join another meeting, but I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have a great hope in the judiciary. We look forward for the leadership of the judiciary in things to keep in place. Yeah, because the judiciary has to do great things. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.